I'm Tim Ventura from American Anti-Gravity, here with Ted Gagnon from Cellatroniks. Ted works with a variety of different health-related products, but those are based on a new extension to quantum mechanics or something on that lines that might offer a lot of potential for larger scale projects. He's been working with very small scale systems, things that relate to the human body. But when I talked to him last week, he thought that he might be able to actually offer advice about the Hutchison Effect, strangely enough. So, Ted, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Fine, thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, can you tell me a little bit about the quantum envelopes? This is something I'd read briefly in Tom Bearden's book, but I've never really understood it very well. So,
Okay, basically the envelopes that I use are multiple frequencies, which are put together and then are manipulated electronically to come out of what we call an enhancer. This is not a coil. Originally, many years ago, we used coils, but we found that the number one, coils are not very efficient. They are very difficult to control from the standpoint of pattern, vortexing, etc. Where with printed circuits, we can control not only the direction, but the pattern and the design of the unit as well. But these envelopes, fundamentally, if we were talking about musical notes, which these are not, these are from another root, they would be a chord, nothing more than multiple frequencies played at the same time. And the reason for that, there's nothing in our universe that actually functions on a single frequency. Everything is made up of multiples of infinite combinations to give us whatever we see, feel, touch, and smell, etc. in our universe.
oh, well, I can actually see an immediate tie-in with Tesla's work. Tesla had
Yes.
he talked about he had one experiment where, well, I mean, among his many electronic experiments, he had a thought experiment where he talked about basically tapping something, and if you tapped it enough times at the right frequency, he was convinced that it would break down and the material would fall apart. And
That's exactly right.
yeah, that's kind of what we've seen with the Hutchison Effect.
Yeah, as I say, I'm sorry I'm not as familiar with how the Hutchison Effect is actually working to be able to relate what I do with what he's doing directly, but from the videos and things that you've sent me, what I'm observing and I'm assuming is that number one, you are working with very high voltage, low amperage kind of thing, the Tesla kind of response as far as voltages are concerned.
Definitely.
Yeah. And with these, particularly, as I say, with most all of Tesla's work, as with Reich's and a lot of other people, the third vector effect is created many times by the inner reactions of other frequencies, which is why coils, for example, were used by Tesla when he was to make the large voltages. These are things which are actually not just tapping into the normal electricity as we're talking about, but actually interdimensional energies which are combining with this to give it an effect.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that the Hutchison Effect is well known for, and one of the things that's always impressed me about it is, unlike the lifters, which are really predictable in many ways and very linear in terms of power, Hutchison, just talking to him the other day, had told me about such a wide variety of effects, and things like metals spontaneously dissociating on the molecular level. If I remember correctly, there was one instance where an I-beam had actually melted from the ceiling and kind of dripped molten metal down, except that it was at room temperature. That and there's a real dissociation between power and thrust in terms of anti-gravity, where unlike the lifters, where I have to use a certain amount of power to get a certain amount of thrust, he turns the equipment on, and sometimes it'll be something small that levitates, and other times, well, for instance, he had a 70, 80-pound cannonball once that just spontaneously started floating. And that, I've actually seen the footage for that. It doesn't shoot off in the distance, but it actually is floating.
Now, let me ask you a question with regards to when he's doing the effect, making the voltage. He's using frequencies naturally. He has to be using frequencies to make the voltages. But is he using multiple frequencies or just a frequency and in turn using different frequencies that he's injecting into the voltage at a given time? Or this is one of the things I'm not clear about as to how he's generating the actual pulse that's causing the effect.
Well, I'm honestly not sure. Although he had mentioned 8 to 9 megahertz, which I believe you'd also mentioned last week when we spoke.
Right. Yeah. Actually, say 9.1, but we're right in the same area. We're using it in a different way, but right in the same ball game.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now, in terms of the 9.1 megahertz range, does that have any special relationship to metals, or is it just atomic structure in general?
It's not. Well, again, I'm not sure whether he uses that as a carrier or as a base and lays other things on it. For example, the kind of work that I do is two ways. One is we lay a carrier wave and then lay things on the carrier. The carrier is basically in the low frequency range is meant to penetrate, because when you're talking about this level of ELF, it goes through almost anything. You can't stop its penetration, so it'll take along with it whatever you happen to lay on its back. Now, we use it this way some way. I don't use so much in the way of carriers anymore. Originally, 30 years ago, I did. I used a lot of carriers, and we stopped using them only because we found that, number one, it just complicated the circuitry and wasn't really necessary for what we were after in a biological response. We get more than enough penetration for what we're doing in the way we're doing it, where the carrier wave is not necessary. For things which are non-biological, then possibly the carrier wave might be more active and more efficient.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, and yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with ELF from studying the Diaquino experiment last year, and he's a Brazilian scientist who had worked with very, very low frequencies, less than 1 cycle per second.
Right.
And he was actually working in conjunction with a gentleman named Steve Burns to put together a transducer, and apparently they believed that by using something like 100 pounds of solid iron, they could actually get enough magnetic flux to make an antenna and store the ELF and then hopefully produce a gravity shield.
Mm-hmm.
So ELF it's definitely an interesting area, and it's very unexplored in terms of conventional science.
Right. It's just, as I say, when you step into the other realms of no longer using the normal, we're using third vector fields. You introduce other sources of energy that you're not working with in three-dimensional form, which are far more vast than what we can work with. Which is the reason why the biological things and the things that we're doing, even now with cobalt, and we just started a new experiment yesterday, and just to change the cobalt readings from one reading to another by restructuring, you change it by almost 10%, which is, quite phenomenal, because you shouldn't be able to change the decay rate of anything. But we're using fields which actually don't even touch the cobalt, because the cobalt is actually in a encapsulated piece of epoxy. So we're actually getting effects through the transference, even through the epoxies. And we're talking about extremely low fields which make up this medium, and actually in the medium itself, once the medium has been structured, there is no field actually being induced on it at all. It's made, it's put into a chamber, it's restructured. Well, when I say restructured, it's matrixed so that it has new information within the medium, and then the cobalt, as an example, is put into the medium, and you get the actual changes, but there's not really a field involved as we would think of fields, and we're actually working with potentials. So we're tapping into another source of change for this decay rate that has nothing to do with what we normally think of in three-dimensional physics and in the world that we're working in.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, and one of the things that you'd mentioned to me was time rates. That
yes.
Time is becoming more of a variable, kind of as science advances, I guess, as we learn more about it. But
time doesn't exist. Time is totally a measure of three-dimensional something we can talk about. It's like hot and cold. It doesn't really exist. It's just we're talking about the same scale, and every person, depending upon where they are on the scale, depends upon how hot or how cold it is. It's all on the same level and the same thing, but from the standpoint of what is hot and what is cold, what is time, time doesn't really exist if we can move past a certain rate of time or cancel as you do with a TRW wave. In reality, you are changing time as those things cancel out. They're no longer in three-dimensional time.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, Julian I think it might have been Julian Barber in England. I can't remember his last name. he actually published a book last year, and I read an article where he had talked about his vision of time as a series of snapshots. Which it's mathematically it works well for quantum mechanics. I've always felt this inevitability to it that kind of precludes that. But
well, as I say, time. You're either talking about past time or future time, because there is no current time. Current time is happening so quickly that it really doesn't exist. You're either done it or you're in the process of doing it, or have done it, or going to do it. But actually, in the process of that instant in time of what we call now, it's just such a short phenomenon. Really, time doesn't exist in that particular modality. It's either past or present.
Yeah.
Or past or future, I should say.
Well, it definitely opens a lot of doors, especially to making the world a little bit more flexible. Letting us kind of get more done with less input. But now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about your products. And you told me a story last week. You make essentially health products, and
fundamentally, yes.
Yeah. One of the stories that you told me about an athlete's heart rate was just amazing. From what you'd said, apparently by using the device that you manufacture, the heart rate went actually down to normal when the athlete was exercising.
Increasing exertion. Yeah, this is actually, we did this first in Japan in the gyms there where we were working with a number of gyms using the equipment that we developed, because it said that the Cellatroniks is an extremely good athletic enhancer. It can actually, as I say, we've actually taken an athlete, and we're not talking about an Olympic athlete, although we mostly work with Olympic teams and that kind of thing. But a normal Joe Blow athlete who's working at a good rate, but not working to his potential, you can change his lifting levels, as an example, as much as 49% in less than 40 minutes. And that's not by doing it artificially. That's only giving him a better source to work from, and also getting his body balanced. And that can either be done with the equipment or through a sport drink, which we have not marketed here in the United States, which you can actually drink and get almost the same effect. Not quite the same effect, but very, very close to what you get with the actual equipment. And now we're actually gone into, as I mentioned to you last week, what we call balance shifters, which is a way of matrixing, in this case a urethane. We've used a number of materials, but we've settled on urethanes because they're easy to work with, and they are a two-component material. And we place the liquids into a chamber, and then we matrix them with the information that we want them to carry. Then the components are mixed together, which locks the information into place into a solid object, which is then a patch. Now, the patch can be a couple of inches in diameter, or it can be 6 or 7 inches in diameter, as some of them are. And then they're worn. Mostly we use them for pain and for stress, but we're also using them in innersoles for shoes. We use them for runners. We use them for weightlifters. We use them for golfers, etc., to achieve different kinds of effects, as well as just relieving pain, but to make the body more relaxed, to give more energy and more stamina. But getting back to the heart rate, this particular experiment was done on a fixed bicycle. The athlete had just come in the morning, so they're fresh, so that we're not talking about any fatigue factor from other exercise the rest of the day. The individual is then put on the bike, set at a given speed and a given pressure on the bike. Heart rate is then monitored for 3 minutes at this given rate and tension. The individual then rests for 1 minute. The enhancer with the equipment is laid on their shoulder with a particular program to increase the body's energy for 1 minute. Then the individual is told to start pedaling again at the same rate and at the same tension as he did on the first part of the experiment for another 3 minutes. And under normal circumstances, because of the fatigue factor, even with the 1 minute rest, there would be a definite difference in the heart rate at the end of the 3 minutes. Normally it will be greater. And in this circumstance, the heart rate after the 3 minutes is about 15% less than it was in the first part of the experiment. Then we have the athlete continue for another 35 seconds to a minute, depending upon the circumstance, to go all out, to just go as hard as they can with the enhancer still on their body. And the heart rate actually then it goes up for a little quick jump, and then it just starts to completely diminish. And after almost a minute, it will be almost normal, and the athlete is going at full blast on the bike and should be just exactly the opposite. It's like pouring water uphill. I have some videos on this, which I'll get to you if you'd like to see them as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we have a number of videos on this particular thing, as well as on lifting individuals, both men and women, how their actual lifting rate changes using the equipment, using the liquid, and basically using the liquid and the machinery to show that what changes can be had. And this is all done as a complete blind. It's done with stress gauges. We use Dynatron 2000s or universal equipment where the athlete cannot see actually what they are lifting. The equipment is set up so that you can test any particular muscle of the body, and then the athlete does whatever that exercise happens to be. It's monitored on a computer where they cannot see it, and then here again, then they're exposed to the equipment, tested again, or the drink, etc. And then this is then compared to the end. But the athlete has no idea of increase or decrease when he's doing it. He just goes to his maximum each time. And as I say, the increases have been as much as 49% in, like I say, in less than an hour's time.
Oh, so the athlete's actually absorbing energy from the device. And
yeah, they actually use the information coming from the device. The best way I can explain it to you is energetic food. That's the simplest way to explain it.
Oh, okay.
The body uses it just like food, and that's because that's all food is energy. It just short circuits the aspect of having to worry about digestive and breaking down the product. It just goes directly into the energy system, and the body uses it directly.
You know, one of the things that we've been running into consistently with alternative science projects has been how to find concrete evidence. And, you know, the videos are an excellent example of that you just mentioned.
Everything that we have done, we've actually done in laboratories and universities all around the world. There's been a couple of papers, scientific papers, which have been published. Some of the first work was done at Stanford. That work is out there. It has to do with interleukin-2 and aconite. Another paper was published, about 1992, with regards to the changing of cobalt and its decay rate. Anything that you can do in a lab and test an allopathic drug, you put this side by side and you can measure. You can do exactly the same thing in real time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not a maybe. There's no problem at all with regards to observing laboratory results with this at all. Not at all. That's the first 15 years. That's all I did was just lab work and monitoring and gathering the data in universities and clinics and hospitals all around the world, 22 different countries.
Yeah, I should probably mention that you've had like 30 years of working in this field,
right.
So this is years and years, you know, really a life's work project.
But like I say, as I say, with this, it is a form of energy, and it's not a problem to monitor or to verify it. For example, right now, as I mentioned to you about these new plant sticks, which are for plants, and a lot of my work has been involved with agricultural applications for the simple reason being it's a lot easier to control agricultural plants as it is to people. You can put them in a box and control the light, the water, everything, so you know that whatever changes you get are what they're coming from. And so a lot of my work has been with regards to plants because, number one, they're not regulated in any way, shape, or form. You can do all kinds of things with plants that you cannot do with people. And this has been a very easy way to observe even the fact of being able to manipulate how a plant grows, make roots bigger, make leaves bigger, make leaves smaller, et cetera, actually manipulate how a plant grows. The sticks that we're doing right now, for example, and we just started a new testing, in fact, today, with a new stick, a new envelope, which we shall see, which is made just for tomatoes. And basically we're doing food crops at this point in time to monitor, but we're actually getting about 2-to-1 growth over the normal in some of the plants. Some of the plants are just stronger, again, because of the envelopes being indicative, just like fertilizers and food for plants. Each one is specific for a plant, and each plant grows better if it has a certain combination of phosphate, nitrogen, etc.
Well, isn't one of the secrets here liquids? You'd mentioned that liquids tend to store charge much better than solids. And
well, you have to start with a liquid. Like the sticks and whatever, the same thing. We start off with a solid. We start off with a urethane. The material is structured. It's then combined, but instead of using a urethane, which is flexible and soft, so we can use as a patch on the body, we use a different material, which that we have a rigid stick that we can physically put into the ground. Then when the water comes in contact with it and the plant is watered, the information from the stick not only transposes into the plant by just being close to the root structure, but it's amplified by the water as the water goes around it. Because it is a stick, and because the information is put into something solid, the radius of exposure is limited. It's the same with when we use the shifters. Where you put them is pretty much where you get the effect. Where if you use the equipment, you can put it on your big toe and see effect in your nose.
Yeah.
Because you're affecting the whole energy field. You do with the patches and with the sticks as well, but on a much smaller level because you don't have the physical intensity involved.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about it as being information. One of the things that's kind of surprising is, we're starting to see, maybe as a result of advanced computer science, but we're starting to see information kind of creep back up the pipe, so to speak, and start to influence, daily life. And I mean, not in an educational way, but in terms of real physical effects. They have a 5-bit quantum computer out there that can, calculate anything up to the maximum for that 5 bits. And, lots of experimentation. And so, all of a sudden these things that were once kind of in the realm of the mind only, are really kind of influencing, or on the verge of influencing daily life. Well, I should probably ask about, in terms of the Hutchison effect and frequencies. If John was listening to this, what path should he probably pursue?
Well, definitely these envelopes. There's no question about it. I mean, from looking at the videos as an example, you're seeing plastic float, you're seeing different kinds of materials move, you're seeing metal bars which actually separate. All of this has to do with the frequency of oscillation. It's no different than taking a glass and hitting it with a particular frequency. If you hit the right frequency at the right volume, the glass shatters. And it's purely a matter of disassociation of the structure of how these atoms are being held together. If you go the other way and use a positive shell, you can actually make that glass stronger. Potential, you could make a glass and keep the field on it so you could drop it and it wouldn't break.
Oh, okay.
You could do exactly the opposite because you can make things come together or you can make things come apart. Like, for example, when I'm working with things like cobalt, as we're doing right now, we work with both kinds of envelopes. Work with what I call a positive shell, which makes things come together and bond better, and we also do the opposite for the parts where we want it to go and make a negative shell, so it makes it disassociate. The best thing I can sort of explain to you on that is gasoline, for example. I developed a device some years ago called Gagnon, which we did not market, sadly, but it just didn't do it. But using the same principle, but when the envelopes are made, the initial testing when I started, there was a misunderstanding with regards to how gasoline should burn better. My thinking was to make it burn better, break it apart, and make it so it is disassociating, and in turn, this would then allow the fuel to burn hotter, etc., etc. Well, as we found out, that was exactly contrary to the reality. You actually want the molecules in gasoline for a car to actually be tighter. You actually want them to come together so when it burns hotter and cleaner. When you loosen them, you actually increase the amount of pollution and what have you in the air as opposed to diminishing, and also cut down the gas mileage. So by changing the envelope that we expose the gasoline to as it was running through the carburetor, changed not only the gas mileage but also the emission that was coming from the vehicle.
Well, I heard an example in quantum mechanics a few years ago, and they were actually talking hypothetically, but they were talking about in the future when they can make nanoscale engineering for particles. And one of the project ideas was having micro manipulators that were so small that they could actually, I guess the electrons on the tips of the atoms would actually be able to mimic other atoms. And so, I guess by the virtue of the way they built this machine, and again, it was years ago, I should apologize for not knowing exactly, but they were talking about making one substance mimic another. And I'm wondering if the envelopes...
That's exactly what we're doing with this. That's what the paper is. It was a stamp. We actually mimicked interleukin-2 and aconite and showed that we not only could emulate the drug, but we actually could improve upon its characteristics. Again, this was all done with regards to cell growth and in a controlled laboratory environment where we actually exposed white cells into the medium, which again, in one case, the water, in that case, it was water that was matrix, and directly to the coil. At that time, it was a coil because I had developed circuits at that point in time. And then we also compared it to electromagnetic fields. And at that point in time, the effect was approximately 4 to 6 times greater than an electromagnetic field with the same information put into it. The difference between a structured liquid as opposed to direct exposure was about 20% at that point in time. Now it's probably where the envelopes have improved and how we're doing it, we're probably within about 7 or 8% of what the actual equipment puts out as far as effect is concerned.
Oh, okay.
But it's all done with regards to anything can be emulated, and that's the difference between what I do and what other people do. Is everything I do is very specific. I have to know what it is we want to expose. The envelopes have to be constructed. Do we want it to be associative or disassociative? I have to know which way the shell is going to be, a negative or a positive shell. What effect are we trying to achieve? If we're working with a virus, and then we want that virus to take and diminish and die, then we want to use a negative shell because this slows it down. If we want it to grow, then we give it a positive shell, and then it grows and does its thing. So it's totally indicative. The shells and the envelopes have to be constructed for the element in which you wish to move. So getting back to Hutchison's effect, for example, envelopes could be constructed and pulsed through, I'm sure, the system of how he's applying the voltage in such a way that only plastic would move and not steel. Only steel would do something and not plastic by just the induction of the appropriate envelopes, so that it's affecting basically those elements within the substance that you're trying to affect and less on the substances which you're not trying to affect.
Oh.
The body, it's the same way. If I make an envelope for a white blood cell as opposed to a red blood cell, the white blood cell will tend to move more than a red blood cell, but we're talking about organisms, nothing ever is solitary. You can't make one thing do something and nothing around it do anything. Everything will be affected in some way, shape, or form. But the point being is that the item that you're trying to stimulate will be the most active portion of the stimulus in that particular whatever it is that you're trying to activate.
One of the things, though, that you have that John might not, because he tends to kind of do a hit-or-miss strategy for different frequencies, is you actually
that's an impossibility.
You actually have a theory for this, right? That explains... It kind of explains what frequencies are associated with...
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of just knowing... If I know what we're trying to stimulate, then we calculate the envelope accordingly. I've developed a formula where I plug in specific values and information, which give me weighted values, which are turned into frequencies applied with other things, which I now have to make up the envelope, and then we come up with a single envelope. But many times, again, biologically, for example, let's say that we're making a program to stimulate an individual and we're trying to do something for their digestive tract. There may be as many as 5,000 or 6,000 envelopes, and then those envelopes may have as many as 9 frequencies in each envelope. So you're talking about not just one little envelope that's made up of 2 or 3 frequencies. You're talking about several thousands of calculated values which are interacting to give us a given response.
Yeah.
It's a very complex modality. It's not just ring a bell and hopefully something moves.
Well, it seems like with John's work, at least, the complexity of it has really kind of gone over everybody's heads, where he's been able to see various aspects of a larger force. But it sounds like just from talking to you last week, and again today, it sounds like your theory about this, which has been tested and proven with Cellatroniks, would kind of explain a lot of his material and kind of give some control to this incredible amount of force that he has.
Yeah, because at this point in time, it appears that very definitely he has, come on the power and the level of stimulus. Now it's just taking the next step and being able to control the stimulus.
Well,
so that you get specific results for for a specific output, you get a specific response.
yeah, this is definitely...
Fundamentally, that's basically, for me, that's what it, I don't, there's lots of people that do lots of work in subtle energy fields, which are just black boxes, I mean, you do this and wow, it changes everything in your body, and you do this, and which is, I'm sorry to say, not very valid. It may work today, but your body changes every single solitary day. So unless the envelopes are constructed to stimulate specific things, magnets are a very good example of this. Magnets are an excellent, viable way of working on the body to help heal the body. But the problem with magnets is the fact that they're made at a given frequency and a given Gauss. So therefore, you may get response today from them, and then a month from now, you may find that you not only don't get a response, you may get just the opposite response. You may get more aches and pains. And it's not because the methodology is wrong. It's only because that particular thing which you're using is limited as to what it can give you. It's not because the magnet therapy is not a workable, viable thing. It is a very viable thing. But the problem is you have to have the things constructed around you to give you what you need on a given point in time.
Oh,
or
sure.
The things that I do, the envelopes are made to specifically stimulate certain things, so that if you know on a given day you want to do more work on your digestion as opposed to your circulation, you would use the envelope that would be for what you're trying to do, digestion as opposed to circulation. It's not a black box. Very specific.
Well, one thing I should ask is, have you ever considered licensing specific sets of frequencies for things like, strengthening...
Yeah, definitely have. Yeah, we did this with a number of things. When I lived in Mexico, we were actually making cosmetics without preservatives. I developed this modality. You can make the cosmetic and not use preservatives. You actually structure the oils and whatever when they're being made, and you don't need to have the preservatives, and we used it in that modality. We also worked on something for fertilizer, which we never did market due to various things for the same modality, to eliminate the use of arsenic in fish fertilizers. Yes, I have very definitely been open to that. Just like I say, haven't done it very much, only because there hasn't been the interest to do so.
Oh, sure. Well, and the ability to emulate different substances do you think that would apply to all of the characteristics? For instance, there was a product that came out a while ago named Starlight, and I think 1993, it was actually one of Popular Science's products of the year. And apparently, a hairdresser from England had actually stumbled onto a nuclear-proof plastic where they actually stuck it in a blast chamber, and the stuff didn't melt. One of the things that, and then on the other side of the equation, we have carbon nanofibers, which are incredibly difficult to make.
Right.
Do you think the frequency sets would allow people to emulate some of the, the cooler materials that are out there?
Definitely. We've done it with metals. We've done it with alloys. And you can do it with alloys and metals. You can make the alloys stronger, and you can make things sometimes come together that wouldn't normally come together very easily by exposing the metals in a liquid state when they're molten and as they're being congealed and mixed. Once they're solid, you can't do anything. But like I say, in a liquid state, everything has to be in this modality. It has to be in a liquid state, in a flexible state where the structure is mobile and viable and flexible, so things can be laid on it. When we do it with a solid substance, if you put it, for example, an enhancer next to cobalt is an example. If you put it there, you can take readings with it with a Geiger counter, and you'll find the changes and everything. The minute you take the enhancer away, the readings go back to their normal state. It doesn't last. Where if we put it in a liquid and then expose it for a long period of time, or in the liquid, then we can maintain that change for longer periods of time. And actually, we're seeing effects which are long-lasting after you remove the cobalt from the liquid and just put it in air and measure it. The actual value has diminished from the control sample when it started as well.
Oh, okay, because the speed of decay has been increased for the cobalt, and...
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and then when it's removed from the environment, it goes back down to a lower level. I've seen a little bit of that with beta voltaic batteries. There are some really interesting energy ideas out there. Strangely enough, being completely ignored by the government and all of the industries that you'd think would have an interest. But Have you ever thought about building something, kind of the end all be all for proving, the cobalt theory in terms of producing energy or something like that?
That's exactly what we're doing now.
Yeah, that would be an amazing.
That's exactly what we're doing. The original work started a year. Our original paper was written on this in about 1992. Some work that I did for NASA up in Nevada, and we did some studies, and then a paper was written on it, and then it just was the end of it, because I really wasn't terribly interested in it at the time, only because, again, that wasn't my particular area of expertise, and I had no real knowledge of it, nor did I have any contacts in the field. Last year, I had someone who actually, a company come to me who was interested in what we're talking about, atomic batteries. And this is something that I have, their particular project hasn't gotten off the ground, only because they haven't been able to fund. But it started me moving back with cobalt, because number one, cobalt 60 is a very easy substance to acquire. It's something that's had a tremendous amount of paperwork on it. So the kind of, if you get changes and get things, if you follow a certain standard, it's something that's not too easy to shoot down. Because it is such a known factor and such an established factor as to its responses and curves, etc. But there have been, and that's something with regards to battery I'm still interested in, and I am still pursuing. There was a project that RCA did in 1950s, in the middle 50s, where they actually developed an atomic battery. It died. I've tried to get hold of Thompson and the other people. No one can give me any information on it. I'm still trying to trace it down to see if anyone has taken that particular modality, because the company that came to me, the reason they were interested in what I do is because the liquid medium that we can construct, the isotope can be placed in the medium to either increase it or decrease the output. So the thought being, if we could get the envelopes to be as efficient enough to increase, let's say, for example, the output by 25% or 30%, then potentially this could be viable to use as a small battery, which could either be directly used in an installation, or use it as a charging modality, which will keep normal batteries continually being charged without having to ever plug them in. Either way, you have a continuous source of power.
Sure. Well, and don't they store nuclear reactor rods in water also? So that would be a direct.
That was the original work. That's where the work has been going for the past. But I'm sorry to say nobody's interested in that.
Yeah.
Well, at least I haven't found any. I presented it to the largest company here in the United States, and they are not working with the rods. They are working with the actual material. The power plants are interested in the rods. And I'm still pursuing that. We've actually gotten the material to, we're down to about 25% when the cobalt is placed in the liquid. So, and also the material does not absorb the radioactive output. Although you normally wouldn't get an absorption with cobalt, particularly in any great quantity, but for long-term exposures, you normally would see something. I don't know what's going to occur with that. Now we've just started the new work going the opposite way for the increase as opposed to the decrease, to see if we can then be utilizing it for something as a power source.
Oh, yeah.
And we just started with that. But originally the idea was to use it in a toxic links modality to help the decay rate move in a different way than normal acceleration. Normally to accelerate an isotope, you've got to take and make it, a bomb is the fastest way to accelerate something. Well, we were actually trying to go through the back door and open what I call portholes in time with the third vector fields and let the energy flow out of three-dimensional space. And instead of going into it and increasing it, it's actually depleting it, but in a very different way, which is sort of the only explanation that really comes about with this, because you have a medium which has no field in it, a medium which has been structured and has no field being applied to it. Put the cobalt into the medium, the amount of output through the medium becomes far greater by about 15 to 20% than what the medium would block by itself. So where does the energy going?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I should mention is your website URL, which is Cellatroniks.com, right? And it's
right.
It's spelled Cellatroniks.
Correct.
And at the Cellatroniks.com website, I noticed you have several products for sale online.
Right. You actually can't order from that, but you can get the information. If you go to betterrelief.com, then you can physically order. But that site was really never set up to sell product. It was really set up for my clients, which are outside the United States, and need just quick reference, and and that's what it was set up for.
Oh, so betterrelief.com, is that just one large word?
Right.
Oh, okay. Well,
and basically, that's where we have the balance shifters and my new book, and and there'll be other odds and ends and things that will be on there very shortly. That site's a new site. It's only been up about a month.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I definitely have to spend a little bit more time going through the sites and learning about your research. I sincerely appreciate your time today. It's been just an amazing experience hearing about this, because it seems like, in the 30 years that you've been working on this, you found solutions to a lot of the problems that other people have been pursuing and just scratching their heads over. So,
well, you just have to look a little bit at, if you look strictly at what has been written and the way physics is supposed to work, you're never going to solve the problem. It's because the kinds of things that happen when you start working with third vector fields, you can't write formulas. You see what goes in, you see what comes out, but what's happening in between is anybody's guess. And that's one of the difficulties of working with this particular modality, because, like I say, you put information in, and what you get out sometimes is you get an effect, but now how is it actually achieving that effect? As I say, particularly when we're starting to work with these mediums that I'm working with, which I call EP mediums, these, there's no field involved. And every time we take the same medium, we took the same medium for the cobalt over for a year, the medium never ever changed from day one. All we did is restructure it. Every time it's restructured, we get an entirely different reading and response. And this is something, again, showing basically, number one, that we can manipulate what the medium is and what it can do. And also the fact that that this particular item, with the idea that it could be utilized in a radioactive environment, as an example, after a period of time, if it did show radioactive output, it could be restructured again to eliminate it, and then the material could be used again, so we don't wind up with another element of toxic liquid, as we do now with water, which is when the rods are spent after they've been sitting there for 30 years. You now not only have rods which are toxic, but you also have the water that they've been stored in, which is entirely toxic.
Well,
you have two elements.
It seems like, and again, I should apologize for my lack of, in some ways, lack of understanding. I should have gone to the website better. But so in one sense, what you're really doing is kind of programming atoms, and then after they've been programming
the information which holds the atoms together. Because you're not really, here again, when atoms move through time and space, because of their crossing in between one another, everything is creating a TRW wave as it moves through time and space as it passes another element.
Oh,
there's a cancellation of field as we go through. Everything does, down to the very smallest particle. It's always rubbing on. There's something always going by it. Well, it's that going by space, that empty space, that we're trying to lay the information on.
Oh, okay.
Which is the reason for making the kind of potential forms that we're talking about. We're not trying to make electromagnetic forms because these are too crude. They stay on the lowest level of the physical body. We want these to affect how things are rotating in time and space. By changing or altering rotation, you change how they reform or how they look in physical space. If you change something's speed and an atom going through time and space and move it from an elliptical shape to a circular shape, its physical form is going to be reflected in an entirely different way when we see it in three-dimensional space.
Well, I'd heard a suggestion from Richard Hoagland, who often appears on the Art Bell Show. He's pretty well known for the Face on Mars mystery, but he had suggested, based on his prior business partnership or just friendship with Bruce De Palma, that I attempt to look for atomic rotational spin as an anti-gravity method. And what he talked about was he started with Eric Laithwaite's experiment, where the gyroscope actually lost weight when Laithwaite spun it up to speed, and he thought that One of the problems that people have been having is the materials just blow apart when they try it because the speeds are so high that it actually rips the metal apart. But
yeah, it's because they get to the ultimate destructive frequency as opposed to because what you're trying to do in levitation is you're trying to disassociate the matter through time and space. By disassociation, you put in more space. By putting in more space, it becomes lighter because the materials are no longer bonding. I mean, this is the simplest explanation for why the things get lighter with what you're doing, and why do they float. It's because of the disassociation of how the things are being bonded together. By giving more air or more space, not necessarily air as we think of air, but more space in that particular structure. If you get too far, then you get complete separation, and then it fails.
oh, okay. Well,
So it's a matter, again, we go back to control again. What are the optimum frequencies so that you don't have to, or the envelope, because it will not be a single frequency, it will be multiples of frequencies that will create an overtone, which will give the optimum results, which is something I've seen in everything that we've done, both in biological things and non-biological things. The more accurate the envelope, the more indicative will the response be. Otherwise, it's like taking and putting something inside of a big bell, and you hit the outside of the bell, and the item inside of the bell will get banged around. It'll move, etc., because the big bell is moving. But that movement may not be beneficial to that item sitting inside of the bell. If you could get the frequency or the harmonics for that item on the inside of the bell so that it would also ring at the same time as the big bell, now you could get something which would be specific, whatever it is that you're trying to do. Because now you have both things resonating at their optimum, whatever their optimum is you're trying to achieve.
well, one of the things I should ask is, because I'm sure I'll get questions about this, would you be open to the thought of publishing, and I know that you have a lot of proprietary stuff, but publishing just the frequencies for anti-gravity, or maybe...
There won't be any given frequencies for anti-gravity. It'll depend upon the material.
Oh, okay.
In other words, if you want to move aluminum, that'll be one envelope. If you want to move plastic, it's going to be another envelope. So, for example, let's say you have something which has both plastic and aluminum, you're going to have both envelopes flying.
Oh, okay.
See what I'm saying? What I would like is to say, if it's possible, I would really like to take and say, if you really want to pursue this, and I really would, I'm very interested in it, to talk to him, I really would like to talk to him to sort of understand better how he physically is getting the voltage to the subject. What is actually at the starting point, and frequencies are naturally the most important point, not so much the output of power, but more the envelopes of frequency as to how he's doing this, to see if envelopes could be easily interjected, and I'm sure they could be.
Yeah.
But, if it's voltage, you can lay it on the line of voltage, whatever the voltage happens to be. There's all kinds of ways of doing it.
Well, both yourself and John have such a detailed knowledge of the things that you work with. Me being kind of a third party, I really tend to get in the way. So what I've already done is I told him about your interest and your research, and then obviously I told you about his research. So yeah, I mean, it would be great for you guys to connect. That would
Yeah, because I'm sure that there's some things that would be not that difficult to come up with in envelopes, that would be that could be tried, and you'll either see response right away, or you won't see response at all. This kind of modality is not the kind of thing that sort of piddles along. You either biologically, it's either boom, it happens like right now, and you can monitor it, or you're in the wrong ballpark and you won't see anything. It's not a maybe kind of a thing at all. You're either there or you're not there.
Yeah.
Pure and simple. It's either on or off.
Oh, definitely. Well, I should probably let you go. I sincerely appreciate your time for this interview.
Not at all.
This has been an amazing learning experience. Do you have anything you'd like to say in close, or?
No, only that, as I say, if there are other individuals out there that are doing work that is, from what they can hear from what that I could be of any help in any relative way, I'd be more than happy to contribute whatever I can contribute. But it's not a matter of just frequencies. It is a matter of how they are applied. The frequencies are important, but also the applicator itself is also extremely important.
Yeah, yeah, and it sounds
So
like
it's a twofold kind of a thing. But I will say this, the envelopes, even when they are played and put through an electromagnetic field just through a normal Helmholtz coil, you will still get effect. They just won't be as great as you make the enhancing device more effective, that's all. It has to do with effectiveness, not whether you get an effect. It's just how much effect will you get. And that's where the design of the end enhancing device or the end administrator of the power makes all the difference in the world.
okay.
So there are two things involved.
Well, thanks again for your time, Ted, and
Very good, Tim.
have a great evening.
Very good. Thank you, now.
Bye.